Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here's Alday.
What is going on with how to win GAC? Welcome back, Islanders. Today we're going to talk about how to win GAC. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at different levels of the game, see what metas are persisting in those, and what people in those areas should be focusing on to maximise their chances of winning, and how they should farm or mod or scout. We're going to talk about all of that today. Let's break this down. Obviously GAC, it's one of our favourite game modes. It is really good. I enjoy it personally. And there's so many different strats you can go. You can go from heavy defense to light defense. You can go for heavy ships, light ships. And it changes depending where you are as to whether you want to full clear the board, whether you're trying to stop an appointment. And we've got to talk about it. It has a slight matchmaking issue at the moment where it will constantly throw up sort of occasionally very difficult matchmaking, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Right, without further ado, let's break it down. So our inner rim initiates. Now, a little bit different. We're going to talk about people in Carbonite and Bronzium, people in those sort of leagues. So what's the meta there? Well, the meta of most matches are that it's not full cleared. Many people will only be able to clear 1 or 2 zones. Rosters aren't that deep and counters aren't that prevalent, so people possibly only have 1 counter for 1 team. If that fails, then very often that team will stymie or block. So what you discover in those is that the meta very much is stopping your opponent. How do you do that? Well, you really sort of look to build one strong team. Now, very often that might come from a Lightspeed bundle, but can also come from just farming people like Darth Revan or Jedi Knight Revan. All of these can be super hard to beat and kind of early game teams. So what would my advice be? Well, if I was trying to stop somebody, you've got to look at your mods on that single team. Focus everything on that single team. That is your win condition. Your win condition is that single team will hold. So I would say to you, mod that incredibly well, farm mod, and remod that team often. Be very careful. I would say if I was at that area, I would probably want to remod that team maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. Just check in case I've picked up a faster speed mod or a higher offense mod or a better mod than I have on. So keep checking the mods on that specific team. Most of these counters have one particular character, whether it's a super fast Darth Revan or a super tanky tank. You know, all of these are key to what you can use. So I would mod often, and I would remod frequently. The other thing to say is that ships are probably dominating, and how quickly you did farming your ships. And I would always say to people, your ship farm is probably one of the most important when you start the game. Start farming your ships. Now, the further you are towards that Executor, Houndstooth, P1, that space and getting that team up and running, that will stop everyone. There isn't really counters for these things anymore, or there's very, very rare counters, or people would need very high relics to be able to counter them. So what you discover is that ships can also be an area where you can get a huge advantage if you're ahead of the people around you. So always focus on ships as well. Build that one team in ships as well. So you're talking about building just 2 strong teams and then getting those holds. Anyway, I'm sure you'll win. Let's move on now to our mid-rim masters. Okay, so here I'm talking about sort of Rhodium and Chromium. Now, this is the Wild West. Now, a Rhodium Chromium, if somebody said to you, what's the typical account in a Rhodium Chromium? I don't know. You can look at it, you'll see people from 12, 13 million who just don't like GAC. You'll see people at 4 or 3 million because they really love GAC, and everything in between. It is a Wild West. Now, you guys really need to work hard to maximize winning in GAC. Now, because of the variety, you have to do a bit of scouting. So my advice to you is scout your opponent. Check to see what the opponent has and what the opponent doesn't have. Check for characters like Treya, Bane, Queen Amidala, the Great Mothers. Check for P1, check for ships. You don't presume that an opponent has a certain team, especially one of those sort of key teams that you're getting a lot of holds with, or we're seeing very meta in defense. It's always very easy to see if somebody's got GLs, but make sure they've got the characters like Cat behind them. What you're going to notice is you're going to see a lot of people where they're maybe still working through a conquest or improving grounds. Even though they have the GL, they might not have the likes of Ben Solo to go with Ray. So you guys need to check, because that will change a lot about the match. It'll change, and you're going to have to set your defense to match what your opponent has or does not have. So I would say scout, work really hard, see what's out there, and check out what your opponent has. I think the other thing in that area, it is such a Wild West, and the matchmaking is so random at times in who you might face. What I'd say is that win what you can win. You know, don't sweat losses. You know, CG will give you matches up that you just can't ever win against accounts that are way too high. If they attack, then they'll beat you sort of teams. Win what you can win. Put your energies into the matches that you think are fair, the ones where you feel you have a chance. But if you get an unfair one, well, maybe just do one battle and put it away, or use it for a practice, or practice certain counters. You know, if you look at it and you think, I'm not going to win this, don't put in as much effort. Don't worry about it. You know, basically. And I guess when you're doing that, the other thing is to focus on things like conquest, focus on your farming, focus on the standard new ship counters, because you're going to need them. Start practicing these things, because inside your area you'll probably start seeing full clears. You know, this is back when people are starting to get more and more teams, and there's not actually as many on defense. So, you know, people will tend to full clear in this bracket. Becomes a lot harder to stop people. So you are moving slightly into that efficiency space, but we'll talk more about efficiency in a minute when I talk about the Kyber sort of levels. So to you, I would say scout your opponent and win what you can win. Put your energies where you can. Okay, let's talk about Kyber and my Outer Rim legends. Well, let's start with Kyber 5 to Kyber 2. We'll break this into sort of two halves, because it does subtly change. So Kyber 5 to Kyber 2, unfortunately, it's all about efficiency. The problem with CG, the problem with the game at the moment, is there's been more and more and more offensive teams. Those teams on offense are too good. You know, you look at teams like Seer Malakos, you look at teams like Bane. These teams, and you look now at the GLs that are in the game, there are too many offensive teams. In fact, there's too many teams. So the board itself is kind of creaking. And I would say that the meta in Kyber 5 to Kyber 2 isn't to stop your opponent, it's to make sure that they don't get as many banners as you do when you full clear. And it ends to be full clear versus full clear. Assuming people are putting the effort in, assuming people have the time, it tends to be a full clear. So inside efficiency batters, well, how do you win? Well, you attack last. I mean, it's silly to say. The meta of just seeing what your opponent does, seeing what risks you have to take. If they've failed 2 or 3 times, then you don't need to take a risk, because you already know. You don't need to worry about banners. You just get the win. So also, if your opponent's attacked, it gives you an opinion or a vision, shall we say, about what might be on the back zone. If they've struggled, there could be a GL or 2 back there. If they haven't struggled and they just full cleared everything, you'll probably know there could be 1 GL back there, but there's unlikely to be 3 or 4. It's going to be more normal. So look for efficiency, attack last. But if you can't do that and you have to attack first, we'll look for banner stripping teams. People like Jabba, Trench, Lord Vader, Seer Malakos, the Great Mothers. All of these teams sort of are hard to beat for high banners. And even though people have counters, Lord Vader has lots and lots of counters, as does Jabba. They don't tend to get that many banners against them at times. Certain teams do, obviously, but these teams do tend to kind of strip banners because of mechanics in them. Anyone with an AoE, anyone who's able to remove the protection of the health on multiple characters at the same time, is going to do you well for that efficiency banner. Avoid teams. Well, I shouldn't say avoid Queen Amidala in defense, because she is a Bane soak. But if you're putting down Queen Amidala, that's for Bane. That's to take away the opponent's Bane. That makes perfect sense. But avoid things like General Grievous, avoid Jawas, avoid anything that can be soloed. I think Shaq and the Clones, anything that has a very standard cheap solo that can be done with either a Nest or a Wampa. Wampa now in particular is somebody that's soloing. OG Kylo Ren can solo certain teams, and Malik can solo certain teams. Look out for these, avoid them at all costs, because they're really going to hamstring you. But if you can avoid those teams, don't give your opponent that automatic solo, and put down banner stripping teams, well, hopefully it'll buy you maybe 10 or 20 point lead by the time they get to ships. Let's talk about ships. So, depending on how you feel, there's two ways to go. You either go light ships, in which case you sort of neutralise the ships, you keep your highest 3 for offense, and you plough on through, or you go more heavy ships. Depending on where your skill level is, depending on how you are at the game, can decide what you want to do with them. I don't think there's any need to go in the middle. I would say that if you go sort of, well, you put maybe just put Leviathan down. Well, that's not good enough, because they're going to be able to 2-tap Leviathan, or they're going to be able to beat Leviathan with something, and then your other two teams, if they're not strong enough or meta, then they're not going to hold. So I think you have to these days go either ultra heavy or ultra light. I would avoid the middle space. And that depends whether you want to neutralize ships. Obviously, something to really be careful of. Make sure your mods on your pilots, especially your capital ship pilots, people like Tarkin, Thrawn, make sure they are all 6E, make sure they're all high up mods, because they will affect the performance of the ship and the counter and the defense. So really focus on that. Check your pilot modding. Make sure, especially when you start doing a new counter. I mean, recently we're seeing counters with mace come in. I don't think I've checked my mace to see what level of mods I've got on it. I'll do it after this video. Maybe put it down below what your maces was. You know, these are sorts of things that we always forget when a new counter comes in, to check the pilots we don't normally use. Okay, so that's where we are. So efficiency, and check sort of, check the counters and look for banner stripping teams. So that's for Kyber 5 to Kyber 2. Let's talk about Kyber 1. I sort of kept this separately because Kyber 1, you start to see the meta of stopping people come back in. It's very strange, because I said that Kyber 2 to Kyber 5 there was way too many teams out there, and that people tended to full clear, and it was about efficiency. Back in Kyber 1, it ceases to be about that. What you discover in Kyber 1 is, I'm going to call them hybrid teams. Look out for people putting Malicos with, say, Lord Vader, or Traya onto a different team. Look for people using the really good datacrons to accelerate people like Leia, even Lord Vader. There can be some flavour of the month sort of datacrons come in. Those can change up certain counters, and whereas all of us just think, well, I'm going to put Dengar, so to speak, with Java, people can use Dengar elsewhere, people can use Stunlock elsewhere. And what you notice in Kyber 1 is very interesting combos, where you will start to see different counters, and especially around people like Leia, Lord Vader, you'll start to see characters on there that you wouldn't normally see outside of Kyber 1. And what that does is you end up probably having one wall, or both walls, of just stacked teams, some of which are standard, people like Queen Amidala, people like Gungans, but you will also get those sort of slightly off meta hybrid mixed teams where it's a GL but it's got a datacron and it's got a weird character too on there, bit of a theory crafting. And why is that? Well, the thing is that a lot of these very special teams, the hybrid teams with a datacron, probably only have one counter. And if that counter fails, because every counter has a percentage of success, then that team can then almost not be beaten. And you see it a lot in Kyber 1, where one particular team gets 6 or 7 battles and just can't be beaten. Things like Balin with the Kron was doing that. We start to see with Galactic Legend Ahsoka Tano as well, that sort of doing it at times. So look out for these things, look out for these hybrid teams. How do you win? Well, you change, you evolve, look for these teams. I mean, when data is published on GAC and you're able to look at generally what everyone used, look for these weird counters, look for these weird compositions, check out the people that you know, people like the Playbook, people like Calvin, people that are very smart, people like Zereth, people that are putting together these compositions. Look at these people and how they're playing them, look at to see what they're putting together, and copy them for weeks 2 and 3. Also, you're going to have to farm your Datacrons. You're going to need a lot of them. You might look at different Datacrons for things like TW from GAC, but we'll talk about that another day. Okay. I hope that helped. I hope that gave you a bit of advice about where I was in level of GAC, and things I would work on and things I would talk to make sure I can, win more of my GACs. Anyway, until next time, look after yourself. Enjoy your SWGOH.